improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Everyone, welcome to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition. This is Brad Colbert, the Iceman, welcoming you to January 22nd. Still in the first month of 2026 and still right in the middle of a very chaotic period globally, domestically, across the board. Tonight's beverage of choice is gin and tonic with a Hendrick's gin, one of my favorite gins. They come in a variety of expressions. No, I am not sponsored. I just enjoy alcohol. And hopefully if you're following along playing the home game, you are too. A lot of things have taken place. We did an earlier broadcast last week, earlier in the normal time slot, simply because Iran had escalated to, I think, a culminating point, and I wanted to chime in. And then I let the rest of the week marinate a bit. Some things that I had anticipated coming to fruition had not. And so we foregoed a Thursday of last week for a Thursday of this week. Hopefully you're not too upset with me. And let's be honest, your liver could probably use a break. Let's go once around the world briefly before talking about tonight's topics. We're going to visit Iran one more time and then talk about Syria, which has had an interesting couple of months and is turning out to have an interesting couple of last days. So on the domestic front, there was a integrated air and missile defense task force, joint task force Gold. Their job is to integrate all of the sensors, the missile defenses, command and control, and then co-locating them into a single command. And that is going to be chaired by a lieutenant general specifically, who will be dual hatting as just the joint force commander, but also the commanding general of the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. This really lays the command and control bedrock for the Golden Dome. If you remember, we talked about that in previous broadcasts. This is part of that infrastructure, part of the command infrastructure. They're located at Peterson Space Force Base. So they were officially stood up. In addition to that, we have National Guard being demobilized from around Portland, Los Angeles, and Chicago. However, simultaneous to that, you have 1,500 troops, active duty troops in Alaska who were placed on prepare to deploy status, probably looking at Minnesota if I was a betting man, but, who knows? Turning our eye to the Middle East, CENTCOM, couple of developments there. We're going to talk about Syria with a little greater detail, so I don't want to discuss it too much here, but 300 ISIS prisoners are currently, or were currently, sorry, let me start that over. No, are currently being held in a prison in Syria, and U.S. is very concerned that that prison may be overturned, be mismanaged, prisoners could escape. You have a lot of people who are pretty high up in the ISIS hierarchy being incarcerated at that prison, and 150 of those were moved from Syria into Iraq. And ultimately, they're looking at 7,000 ISIS detainees could potentially be transferred from Syria to Iraq. Didn't specify where in Iraq that was going to be taking place, but it makes sense. The U.S. has much more control and much more oversight of infrastructure in Iraq. And so I can definitely digest that one. It is in conjunction with negotiations that are taking place in Syria, and we'll get that in its own segment here in a minute. CENTCOM opened up a new air defense operations cell in Qatar, and the timing is I don't want to say ironic, but it is very foreshadowing to see a fusion cell for air defense in Qatar around the same time that we are threatening kinetic actions in Iran, which would only yield second-order effects of proxy attacks to our U.S. forces in the Middle East, which Qatar is strategically placed to help defend. So this is to deter cross-border strikes, drones, missiles, and Yeah, like I said, the timing is exactly what you would expect. AFRICOM, Somalia, we still have airstrikes taking place against ISIS and Al-Shabaab, and that is in conjunction with the Syrian federal government. So it's always good to see the United States joint strikes. Ostensibly we could do it unilaterally, but bilaterally is always better. It's better to spread some of that success to our partner forces, which comes back in spades later with shared space, territorial rights, better coordination and information sharing. So that was good. Indo-PACOM and basically India-Pacific, not a whole lot going over there. They had a symposium of, partner militaries, diplomatic. It's boring. There was not a whole lot going on in Indo-PACOM as far as that is concerned. Now, one interesting thing that took place was a freedom of navigation exercise in the Strait of Taiwan. And if you're not familiar, the laws of the sea go back hundreds of years, and they're constantly being revised. I don't know when the last update of the law of the sea was taking place. But essentially, freedom of navigation is an event or a thing that one country will do to transit through the ocean, through a waterway, adjacent to another country's border to reinforce navigable waters. One of the things that China is doing is building artificial islands and claiming territorial waters that historically have not been theirs. To dispute that, the rule says that you must transit through there. And by doing so, it's twofold. One, it sends a message to Beijing, you don't own these waterways, we cannot be intimidated. And then two, it legally shows usage. It is kind of like squatters' rights. If you don't dispute somebody's claim on a territorial waterway, then it becomes theirs by default over time. And so this was the first one of 2026. You had two ships. You had a Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyer, and you had a survey ship, the John Finn. And they essentially took 2 days, last Saturday and Friday, to transit through the Strait of Taiwan. And then about that same time, coincidentally, China launched 25 sorties of aircraft overhead under the auspices of monitoring the ships transiting through. And Beijing, of course, feels that this is escalatory, whereas the real mission for us is deterrence and basically shaping a response cycle. Keep an eye on this because there's going to be more of these freedom of navigation exercises by the United States Navy and our partner forces, Australia, the United Kingdom, a couple of other countries, possibly Japan, just to essentially prove to Beijing that they don't have hegemony over Taiwan and certainly not the Straits. So this is all, in my opinion, a lead up towards 2027's big, Sunday pay-per-view event. More on that as it comes out. European Command, Eurocom, they had a NATO Chief of Defense conference in Brussels, 21-22, so yesterday and today. They're continuing to monitor the Arctic region, which kind of composes Greenland as well, as an overarching security umbrella to try to deter Russian expansionism. And it is a little flared with all of the Greenland rhetoric. I understand that Trump made a statement at the Davos Economic Symposium that he is not interested in military action to claim Greenland, but that he is looking at basically everything else. Diplomatic, financial sanctions, and a whole host of really hurt feelings. So Greenland continues to be in the news. Let's see. Southcom. Trying to remember. Oh, we're continuing to do ship interdiction on maritime vessels under false flags. France just interdicted and secured a vessel within the last couple of days, claimed it. It was one of the Black Fleet that Iran is using to transport oil illicitly. And they are continuing to, between the United States and some of our allies, I love that term, allies, by the way, it continues to shrink as the weeks go by, but we are continuing to locate and interdict these maritime vessels where and when they are found. And I'm all for it. I think anything we can do to economically deter China and Russia and Iran long term, it's a good thing. It's not only a good thing for the United States, but it's a good thing globally. I don't feel that anything that those three countries I just mentioned have done in the last 50 to 60 years has exactly progressed peace, freedom, individual liberties, peace in the world. So, yeah, anyways. Activation of a new Space Force in the Space Force South. Space Force is becoming more and more integral to the Department of War, to the U.S. strategic posture, to our global reach. I've said before, I think space, God, here we go. This is going to be a cliche, and I can just hear the eye rolls. Space is literally the final frontier. Okay, there, I said it. It's the next battlefield. It is the ultimate battlefield. If you can control low Earth orbit, geosynchronous, you are going to dominate the battle space. It is part of the kill chain space. And without it, you don't have the strategic advantage. As we saw in Venezuela, there was a lot of integration of Space Force and Space Command in that operation. And so the standing up of U.S. Southern Command's Space Force South is really just a public acknowledgement that space as a battle shaping tool is front and center. And then this pretty much carves out the Southern Command for Space Force's, oversight. They've been active for about a month. This was really just the color unfurling. It's at Davis Monthan Air Force Base. Yeah, it's nice. I like the fact that we call them guardians, by the way. You have Marines, you have sailors, you have airmen, you have soldiers. Well, Space Force individuals are referred to as guardians. So there you go. The other thing globally that I just wanted to reference before we shifted to our subtopics is this board of peace. Yeah. All right, I'm just going to report the facts and try to leave my snarky opinions aside. So essentially, this is something that the president had incepted to help oversee the reconstruction of Gaza, and then it kind of blossomed from there. It was a by invitation only opportunity to spend $1 billion to get a seat at the table to help discuss, influence, have a say in reconstruction and governance in Gaza moving forward. A bunch of countries signed up, but a bunch of countries didn't. What's unique about this is, one, it's pay to play, unlike the United Nations, and it has teeth, also unlike the United Nations. So think of it as a hybrid between NATO and the United Nations. It was stood up this month. It was essentially to oversee post-war stabilization, specifically on Gaza, but it's been positioned as sort of a corporate version of the United Nations. And I think that the intentions are to extend this reconstruction towards other areas of the globe that would call for it. This just happens to be the first one. It would not surprise me if in a post-Russia-Ukrainian peace, that this board of peace is called in to help, navigate, steer this future Ukraine. I don't know. It's the thing about it is that even if it's civilian led, and it is right now, it's civilian led. You have United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, a few others, but even though it's civilian led, it's still going to require a military component to enforce it. And where do you think that military component is going to come from? It's going to come from the United States almost exclusively, which means that the Department of War is going to have to back up all of the bureaucratic and diplomatic decisions that this board of peace manages to come up with. So we're going to have to do the ISR, the air missile defense, mobility, logistics, communication, force protection, all of it. There's a lot of things that I think that the UN does very poorly. But I will say this. The member nations all contribute towards United Nations peacekeeping forces. Now, they're mostly ineffectual, but there's at least a contributing there. I don't know who's going to recognize the Board of Peace, who's going to fund it, who's going to follow its authority. So how is that going to affect basing, overflight, intel sharing, all of this legitimacy narratives? So that's my concern. I think that the better play here would have maybe been to, I don't know, stand up some type of democratically elected government in Gaza, disarm Hamas, and then put in UN peacekeeping forces to oversee reconstruction efforts with the, World Monetary Fund, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, bankrolling it. I guess there's other ways to do this other than standing up a board of peace, but whatever. Okay, so that's our once around the world, shifting focus towards the other alligator in the boat, or certainly the ugliest one, and that's Iran. So I spoke about Iran about a week and a half ago. I firmly believed at that time that we would launch a kinetic strike. I felt that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help tip the scales towards potential regime change by exerting pressure on the outside while pressure was exerted internally. I also didn't think the protest would have lasted nearly as long as it did. Most people said that if it had gone on 16 days was basically the sweet spot. If it lasted for 16 days, there was genuine opportunities for real change in that country. Now, why is it 16 days? Couldn't tell you. But that's what the think tanks, the international experts in several different nations, not just the United States, had all said. It lasted 14. And then the regime did pretty much what most people thought they would do, myself included, is they killed a shitload of people. At last count, officially, it's somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000, but those numbers are grossly underreported. Most people believe it's closer to 20 to 25,000 dead. I read an article that had talked a lot about the facial injuries that a lot of the doctors were treating. Eye injuries, 7 to 1,000 Iranian citizens have lost an eye because the security forces were deliberately shooting pellet guns at the rioters' faces, protesters, not rioters. Another 11 to 12,000 have facial injuries, maxillofacial, eye, nose, all of that, where they were either shot in the face with non-lethals or beaten. They're going for the head. The protests abated for the most part. But if you look in the media today, about an hour before I was looking at some articles, they're starting to flare back up, and it might happen. that they find more fuel and that these protests are launched again. The administration has been threatening quite publicly that there would be consequences for killing protesters. There was supposed to have been mass hanging of about 800 protesters, some very frantic calls between some backdoor channels in Iran and the United States intelligence community, and ended up on the president's desk, stopped that. And then if you look at it forensically, it was interesting to see that Israel, Netanyahu had called President Trump last Wednesday, which was really the day that most people thought the strikes were going to take place, to tell him Israel's not ready. We can't sustain or defend an attack from Iran or its proxies right now. And so he appealed to President Trump to back down. And then you also had Saudi Arabia, who called and had a conversation with President. And a lot of folks thought that Wednesday afternoon of last week, there would be strikes against the regime, and they didn't happen. So you had a lot of things take place, pretty much textbook for the most part, over the last week or so in the protests. The media blackout, we're talking about television, internet, cell phone, and then landline, which is something they'd never done before. That gave camouflage to the security forces, not just the IGRC, but local security forces, police, the militia, to majorly crack down on the protesters. And that media blackout, for the most part, it's still there. Some stuff has been smuggled out, Starlink, a couple of other things, but for the most part, it's still pretty much incommunicado. So the United States put a fresh round of sanctions against the Iranian government, the regime. Europe is signaling to do the same. So I don't want to say back to normal, because it's far from it. The damage that the protests have done to the regime are irreparable. There is definitely cracks in that infrastructure, and I think those cracks and fissures are only going to get wider. So even if the regime doesn't topple today, tomorrow, next week, it's in decline. I mean, this is a bellwether, I feel. But what is the United States military going to do about it if these protests flare back up again? There's a couple options. At the UN Security Council, the ambassador to the UN, the United States ambassador, notified UN all options are still on the table. So if there is a continued escalation of internal reprisals, the United States is prepared to launch attacks. Now, I personally feel that you can provide a tremendous amount of external pressure towards the Iranian regime by targeting its center of gravity, which I believe is the IRGC. Now, I'm not in the war room in the White House, so I don't know what they have come up with, but what they are kind of broadcasting is a little bit different. And some of the open source media, some of the pundits are theorizing that there is no effective way to do strikes against the Iranian government that enables regime change. Okay. No, you cannot bomb Iran into regime change, but I think there's pressure points. And if you're strategic and surgical, you can apply those pressures while limiting civilian casualties and potentially exacerbating a regime decline or capitulation. That's my 2 cents on it anyways. There's a lot of signaling that, if you look at, tells me that kinetic strikes are still a possibility. One is the force protection measures that are being taken by U.S. forces in the Middle East. They're extracting a lot of non-essential people from U.S. bases overseas in the Middle East. All non-essentials are going somewhere else, whether it's Germany or back to the States, or there's a couple other places they can pull them out too. And then we talked about that Qatar air defense cell that they stood up. That tells me that they're expecting more missile attacks, cross-border strikes, drone attacks. They're also standing up some greater force protection measures on some of the air bases, which hedges against a retaliation risk. Well, why would you need to hedge against a retaliation risk unless there was a high likelihood of retaliation, which means a strike? The other big one is redeployment of a carrier group, and it has left the South American region heading towards that part of the world. And that's the big one, because a lot of the Middle East countries were not willing to allow U.S. forces basing if it meant launching an attack. So a lot of our bases in the Middle East are a byproduct of the first Gulf War, when President Bush Sr. went in and kicked Saddam out of Kuwait. We got basing rights in a lot of these Middle Eastern countries because they saw the threat and they liked having the United States in their backyard. We've kept that up, but we still do it at the behest of the host nation. So if we were going to launch an attack on Iran from a base in Qatar or UAE, or most likely Saudi Arabia, we kind of run it by their government. And when they say no, you have to respect that. But that is not the only place that we can launch from. So a carrier group, 70, 75 aircraft, and all of the support vessels that go along with it, that you park that off somebody's coast and they're going to stand up and take notice. We have more aircraft on one U.S. aircraft carrier than the entire British Air Force has, period. So think about that for a minute. And we have several aircraft carriers, and that is not including what we have based domestically. So we have a tremendous amount of air power that we can project. Aircraft carriers are one of the ways that we do it expeditionary. So the fact that we are moving a carrier group and building up signals that we're not taking force strikes off the table, and we have a couple of options. So if you look at these options and we break them down by the numbers, ranked in order, force protection. So we talked about that. Deterrence postures already underway. It prevents the retaliation. Okay. You also have non-kinetic escalation options that are being applied already and can continue to be scaled up or down. And this is nice because not only are they scalable, but they're deniable. So we're talking about cyber attacks inside of Iran and its proxies, intel enablement, information operations, so psychological warfare, and then covert disruption. If you think that the United States does not have lines of communication towards dissident groups, rebels inside the country of Iran, I think you're being naive. We do. And we maintain those, and we can increase or decrease, as much as possible through proxy. But yeah, we can do limited standoff strikes. It's plausible, but it's constrained. So if you do launch calibrated strikes to punish the IGRC or other security apparatus, or degrade military capabilities, like hitting them in their barracks, hitting their command and control, you don't necessarily guarantee regime collapse, but it's much more manageable than a full campaign, and it is limited. Because of that, the reprisals could and should be potentially limited as well. It's punishment. It's got bite, but it's not full out, war with Iran, which a lot of people are worried about. And then I think the last thing in the order of attack, least likely, but it's possible, would be a large-scale campaign strike. It requires a big buildup, though. It would be more than just one carrier group. You'd probably have to get at least one of the Middle East countries to allow for sorties to be flown from our U.S. bases. And I just don't think that President Trump has that right now. But it could change if the instances in Iran continue to escalate, or they cross some of the red lines, like attacking U.S. bases overseas. Then it really doesn't matter. We'll do whatever it takes, and then damn the consequences. So if there is any kind of attack on U.S. forces or any kind of escalation or retaliation, then yeah, expect it. If there's any nuclear shift, any threshold that moves, any even though it's a background focus, it's always in the background. It's not going away. So if they do anything that shows that they are escalatory on the nuclear front, I would expect us to immediately go back and strike again. And then, publicly, the administration has put its face on these executions, the casualty escalation in Iran towards the protesters. And Trump, as you know, he doesn't like to lose face. I feel that if that red line is crossed, then there's a high likelihood that he'll strike regardless. So, yeah. So if that happens, what are the consequences? Well, we talked about them a little bit last week, but we talked about those more in the international market impacts, global. What is it on the micro level? Well, the regime is most likely going to take out a tremendous amount of energy and hatred and anger towards the protesters. I think that it's going to justify a harsher internal repression. I don't think that the regime gives two shits about its people. I think all that it cares about is remaining in power. And I think that it's going to use any justification possible to continue to be despotic. So, yeah. The next thing that's going to take place if we were to strike would be reprisals against U.S. personnel in the region. And we have thousands. There are thousands of U.S. troops abroad and facilities. So it's not just personnel, it's equipment, it's ships, it's infrastructure, and they don't have to put boots on the ground to do it. They have a lot of drones. Iran exports a tremendous amount of those drones, either because they're flying them to the target or they send them over to be used by other countries, most recently Russia. That's definitely going to take place, almost immediately, I would expect. The Gulf states that base U.S. forces, so Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they all risk being dragged in, if not just politically, then physically through, as I said, retaliation strikes, internal unrest. It doesn't have to be strikes. It can be a lot of protests by pro-Iranian sympathizers within those countries against their government, which would then help pressure them to either not allow the U.S. to launch sorties against Iran or to kick us out entirely. Definitely going to be reprisals in Israel. I mean, anything. The Iranians wake up with a headache and they immediately take it out on Israel. So that doesn't fucking matter. A huge strike in global energy and shipping. We talked about that in the last broadcast. It is expensive to insure these ships. And if you can't get an underwriter to insure the ships, then they're not going to sail. So what do you think that's going to do to commerce? A lot of oil flows through that strait. And if it's not flowing, that's going to send oil prices sky high. Now, looking longer term, 30, 180 days down the road, you've got a tremendous amount of proxy capability it's out there. It is much less capable than it has ever been, partially thanks to sanctions, partially thanks to Israeli strikes and attacks. And There's some other things in there as well, but they can, given 2, 3, 6 months, they can ramp up. And then we already have Iran striving to obtain a nuclear weapon, and they're not allowing the International Atomic Energy Commission to come in and inspect. And if we hit them, I would never expect them to be allowed in again. And that basically closes the curtain on the Iranian nuclear program, and it just hardens their argument for deterrence. Part of what we have sold the Iranians in disarming their nuclear ambitions is there's nothing that you have to fear that require these weapons. I mean, we tried the same tactic with North Korea, but they're insane. You can't negotiate with them. But we had limited success with the Iranians. If we strike them, that's done. Is regime change a plausible outcome, period? I think that it's plausible as a political outcome. I don't necessarily know if it's plausible as direct byproduct of U.S. strikes, but you can hit pressure points which at least vicariously lead towards regime change. So it seems like I'm being a hypocrite, not intentionally, more accidentally. You can't use airstrikes to replace domestic power shifts, but I think you can definitely use it to force elite fracture, security force defections, and a succession crisis, as we've talked about in the last episode. So there's a lot to look at. A lot of people feel that an attack on the Iranian regime is going to cause a rally around the flag. I don't believe that. I think that if you're a zealot, if you're dogmatic, you're already on the regime side. Nothing external is ever going to drive you farther into that. If you are already shouting death to Khomeini and you can't buy groceries and your paycheck is a pittance, then no amount of U.S. strikes at an oil platform or a military barracks on the other side of the Iranian country is going to bother you. Yeah. But a lot of people are saying no amount of strikes is going to force a regime change. It doesn't matter what. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think that with an external action, it definitely influences the odds of a regime change. So things to watch for next. I would, again, monitor those carrier groups, see what's taking place with that. Look at shipping insurance spikes and oil volatility. That's also going to tell you something. The hedge fund markets, those people on Wall Street and in other markets, they're savvy. They read the same stuff that a lot of other people do. They look for market indicators. So that is always a keen indicator as to whether or not strikes are forthcoming. Let's see what else on that topic. That's probably it. Just have to watch it. Most of the time, the president has struck on a weekend, and it's Thursday. I am very surprised that we did not strike last Wednesday, but a lot of times strikes take place on the weekend, and the reason is not necessarily, well, there's a couple of different reasons. One is the news cycle. It's off cycle. It's on a weekend. It usually doesn't start again until Monday as far as the news cycle goes. So anything that takes place on a Saturday, you can report on Sunday, and it's much softened impactfully on a Monday. So if you look at President Trump's history, he's almost always struck on a weekend. You go back to 2017, his first presidency, Yemen, the ground raid, AQAP, that was Sunday. You'd go back to April 13 and 14 of 2018, That was announced Friday night, and then we struck on Saturday. Syria chemical weapons response. That's what that was done. You go back to Baghdadi raid, 2019, Saturday night operation announced on a Sunday, and it's not always specifically designed to fall on a weekend. A lot of it is the operational window. Once an operational window opens, it doesn't matter what fucking day of the week it is, you hit it. But in this particular instance, it seems to always fall on weekends. And so we have this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday still coming up where it's possible that there's going to be a strike, but I'm not holding out for one. The Houthis, the Yemen Houthis had this large scale strike that was Saturday, March 2025. So what I basically did was go back and I looked at all of the major public kinetic actions that the Trump administration took, last administration and this one, and they almost always fall on a weekend. So I don't know. It's an interesting data point. I'll tell you that if we do strike Iran, it is going to have some very interesting ripple effects globally, and we've talked about them. So I won't belabor the point. Let's move over to our Syria information. It is unfortunate because I think that the Syria campaign is another example of U.S. success and U.S. failure. We've kind of, for the second time in this generation, left one of our allies behind. I mean, we pull out of Afghanistan, and we spent 20 years there building up this government, telling women that they had just as much of a right to an education and a vote in the government and their own lives as a man does, that children do deserve an education, and that theocracy is not the best form of governance. And then we left. And what happened? We saw that vacuum filled by the exact people that we spent 2 decades kicking out of power. And then Afghanistan is all those gains, all those wonderful social, economic gains gone, evaporated. Well, we're doing something not too dissimilar in Syria at the moment. If you're not familiar, Syria has been in a civil war since the fall of Assad. Well, it was before Assad. The civil war caused him to be deposed. Since then, you've had Ahmad al-Shara as the president, and the government is pushing to absorb and integrate the Kurdish-led security forces. The SDF, the Kurdish-led security defense forces, helped defeat Assad and has been fighting this guerrilla war against a couple of different organizations that the U.S. is against. So we backed them. We backed them when Assad was in power. We backed them during the Syrian civil war. And now we're not backing them anymore. And there's a couple of reasons why, and they're pragmatic, and they're just devastating all at the same time. Because it seems like, once again, the United States is not standing by its principles. It's not standing by its allies. We are not, I want to say leading by example, but that's so idealistic and so, sophomoric a statement. I feel like every time we leave one of our allies behind, it's just, one more crack in the wall that the United States has spent, generations building, that helps prop up this belief that we are the shining city on the hill. But I digress. Let's get back to the crux of the issue. Okay. the U.S. is pivoting from being SDF's primary backer to really being a broker of a controlled handover. So you have these Kurdish individuals in Syria, individuals. You have this Kurdish ethnicity who believe that they are independent and sovereign. They're fierce. They're very loyal, and we backed them. And we're not backing them anymore. And we are actively campaigning to hand them and their lands over and being assimilated into the current Syrian government. And it's for a lot of pragmatic reasons. One is the ISIS detainee and prison instability that we spoke about just a moment ago. And we fear a revival of the insurgency. I think the United States publicly and privately is pretty much burnt out on the Syria campaign. We are fucking tired of it. But at the same token, you waded into that quagmire. You actively participated in that. And if you break it, you buy it. So whether it is uncomfortable or not, I feel like we should stand by the SDF and look towards giving them their own land. We tried the same thing in Iraq. It didn't work. So there's currently been a tremendous amount of fighting between the legitimate, or I should say, current government of Syria and the SDF. There's a 4-day ceasefire, and it is in place so that the United States, Syrian government, and SDF can submit an integrated plan to try and fold the SDF into the Syrians. All of this is under the guise of the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Ashari. And he's a real son of a bitch. A little bit of background on him and why Washington now treats him like a partner, even though he's really not. So we'll do this somewhat compressed. So Ahmed al-Ashari is the political name used by a man long known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, and he rose from a jihadist militant to Syria's ruler. And the guy has a long track record of atrocities and insurgency and thuggery. And this isn't me. This is based off of United Nations documents, U.S. documents. But he started as an Iraqi insurgent. So he's widely described as a Syrian who was fighting with al-Qaeda in Iraq after 2003. So this is one of the people who fought against the U.S. forces in Iraq as a member of al-Qaeda. He fought for AQI, and he later founded his own terrorist organization, the Jabhat al-Nusra. So in 2012, he founded the al-Nusra Front, al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, and he became its leader. In 2006, he breaks off from them, rebrands himself, and he starts a new group called HTS, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. I don't speak Farsi. Anyways. So he breaks off. He attempts to presents himself as a little more of a state building posture while still maintaining coercive control. So he's still in Syria. The United States Department of State rewards a $10 million bounty for any information on him under his militant leadership identity in 2017. And then after Assad falls in December of 2024, this guy becomes the de facto leader and then president of Syria. So he comes from a long line of terrorism organizations, running a terrorism cell, and then starting his own cell before rebranding himself as a diplomat. He's not. He's a thug. And a lot of people are saying that he is now a U.S. ally. He's not. He's more of a transactional U.S. partner. And a lot of people feel that that distinction matters. So Reuters explicitly frames a U.S. policy shift that Washington is now backing integration under his government and treating him as its partner as it downgrades SDF's role because we want the ISIS prisoners out of Iraq. We don't want an insurgency in Syria any longer. Yeah. So to kind of summarize this guy, former jihadist, insurgent leader of AQI, al-Nusra, and HTS. He's then rebranded, formally left al-Qaeda in 2016, emerged as Syria's post-Assad president, and now the U.S. treats him as the de facto partner because he's helping us contain ISIS, because he's helping us secure detainee infrastructure. He is stabilizing Syria under a single command authority, which, admittedly, it beats fractured militias. He's the only one that was kind of able to pool all of the militias together. I mean, we went through the same thing in Afghanistan in 2001. Hamid Karzai, 2001, 2002, did the same thing. The difference is that Karzai didn't come from a colorful past as this guy did. We are also using sanction relief to help leverage his cooperation, international legitimacy as well, and other conditional tools that if he does not adhere to, go away. So we kind of have him on a leash. He's an ally in the same way that a storm is helpful to a sailor. Only if it blows where you want it to go, and only until it doesn't. So we're not really forgiving his past. We're not embracing it. We're just betting that current incentives force him to align with our Western objectives, which is containing ISIS. We don't want the Syrian state to collapse. We want to limit regional spillover, and we want to reduce justification for these endless interventions, especially in a post-Trump Monroe doctrine. But I don't think that this guy has been completely transformed. Not at all. I think that what you're really doing is you're handing over the SDF, which was the one thorn in his side, in the hopes that Syria stabilizes. And I think it's cheap. And I think it's sleazy. And I think that the United States owes our partners better. But yeah, anyways. We are continuing to conduct large-scale attacks in Syria against ISIS. And as recent as January 10th, 16th, both of those dates we did strikes. We killed an al-Qaeda leader that was tied to a deadly ambush back in 2025. The U.S. needs Syria to cooperate with us as we continue to target ISIS. And they're still a very emergent threat. So, absolutely. We want those prisoners that we're currently storing in Syria out, move them to Iraq, and that requires Syrian participation. Turkey is helping to negotiate, but they have their own interests in this. So these Kurdish fighters on the border of Turkey is a real worry towards Turkey, and they have continued to engage in cross-border skirmishes with the Kurds, with SDF. So anything that Turkey can do to help integrate the SDF back into Damascus's framework is in Turkey's best interest, but they are not doing it altruistically. They're very selfish reasons for Turkey who are helping to broker this peace. to help Washington broker this peace. The U.S. Treasury is tying massive sanction relief to these conditions. We are not allowing the SDF to be folded into the Syrian government whole cloth. There are caveats. You have to protect the minorities, no terrorist safe havens. There's other caveats and provisos, but as we've seen before, the Syrian government, the new one, can just as easily ignore all of these and go back to what it was during Assad, which was a lot of sectarian violence and a lot of reprisals against the Kurdish, just like there was in Iraq. And it's funny because there seems to be this exchange program where Kurds in Iraq have come over into Syria to help the Kurds in Syria fight, and vice versa. It's, matter. The Turkish government recently was accused by the SDF of striking a drone strike near Hasaka. Turkey denies it. They are continuing to treat the Turkish armed structures near its borders as an existential security threat, and they are not going to stop even if there is some type of peace agreement between the SDF and the Syrian government. Even if they are folded into the new government in Syria, I don't think that Turkey is going to stop attacking the Kurds on the near its border. You also have another interesting twist between Israel and Iran and Hezbollah. So there's a lot of Iranian/Hezbollah networks inside Syria, and Israel has continued to strike them. Airstrikes exclusively, but yeah, a lot of Israeli airstrikes taking place in Syria against Hezbollah, and that's not going to stop either. You also have a very brittle humanitarian conditions in Syria right now. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has said that there's ongoing needs for external international support mechanisms. So what they're basically saying is that the new government doesn't equal capacity, that humanitarian deterioration is always going to be a catalyst for radicalization, displacement, and renewed conflict, and that they want to make sure that that is handled appropriately. I gotta say, I didn't want to bring this up, but it is one of the things that I was disheartened to see USAID go away. And look, I knew, interacted, talked to, saw, treaded ground with, I'm not sure how to describe it, with a lot of USAID folks. They're not my kind of people, all right? Almost to the individual, they're crunchy granola eaters, and that's just not my demographic, you know? But as an expression of soft power, they did a lot. If you look at neo-imperialism, they do a lot. If you look at exporting U.S. culture, they did a lot. And this is an instance where USAID would be useful in humanitarian relief. And I get it. A lot of people don't care about that, but you would be amazed at, you could take a 10, 12, 14-year-old boy, Syrian in this case, and you can give them food, medical attention, and a little bit of education, all brought to you by your good friends in the United States. Or alternatively, you didn't show up that day and he was recruited by ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Who the fuck knows? Now he's 14, 16, 18 years old, carrying an AK, wearing a black hood on his face, and he's shooting at us. I mean, that's a little watered down, but it's still factual. So the United Nations Humanitarian Affairs Security Council, their willingness, their interest in this whole thing, it's another X factor. Possible outcomes within the next month to 6 months. Managed reintegration is the most stabilizing. SDF, they integrate into the state structures. They get a negotiated Kurdish rights and security agreements where they can at least have control of their own destiny. You shift ISIS detainee responsibility away from the SDF and you move it towards U.S. control, preferably in Iraq, all politically backing Damascus as the main interlocutor. And I think that's the best outcome. It's the most stable. Turkey, if integration preserves Kurdish armed coherence, then Turkey is going to remain uneasy and they may keep striking. But I hate to frame it this way, but that's a Turkey-Kurdish issue and probably isn't going to draw in anything else, or it's not going to, spiral into a pre-current government, an Assad-era civil war. So that one works out well. There's another outcome. The ceasefire collapses, and then we go back to urban fighting, which is what we have now. And then there's this detainee crisis with upwards of 7,000 ISIS detainees who, over the past 9 years, have been rounded up and taken off the battlefield, potentially finding their way back onto the battlefield if the opportunity presents itself. And remember, anytime that there is a collapse of an established society, established government, a order to things, that's just a bedrock for ISIS to bloom. Because when it comes to terrorism, disorder is oxygen. And anytime that this takes place, they just blossom. Outcome C, you have Turkey could expand their operations either overtly or covertly, and puts pressure to shape the post-integration map near its borders, regardless of whatever Damascus and SDF arrangements are made. The humanitarian impacts to that are pretty robust. A lot of border security, a lot of refugee crisis, a lot of, it's basically a micro version of what's taking place in Gaza. There's also the Israel and Iranian escalation that could continue to be on the forefront. If Israel's strike tempo against Hezbollah increases, then that could expand the battle space as well. So this whole paradigm, as I mentioned in the outset, is incredibly disheartening to me on a personal level, because I feel like when the United States enters into a partnership with a foreign ally, even if it is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, you stand by that. You stand by your principles, and I think that you need to honor those. I think it's incredibly important. And as a war fighter, it is something that you have to live by. You have to have a code. You have to have some type of virtue that you are willing to die for, because in all of this, it is really the civilians that are paying the bill with this government whiplash. Who's in charge? Who's not in charge? And this political transition talk, it matters far less than whether security and service and justice function on the ground. So that's what's taking place in Syria. It is a new government. It is a new day. And the allies of yesterday apparently are no longer needed. And when you're no longer needed, you just get thrown away. There's a lot of things that the United States has done in the, almost 250 years of its existence that are incredible and that should be celebrated, and that are some of the most impressive accomplishments that the human race has done on our time on this planet. And then there's a lot of things that are just like, wow, I can't believe you did that. You're such an asshole. Yeah. Leaving Afghanistan was definitely one of them. And I'm not going to say that this is as egregious, but it's just too soon, bro. Too soon on the heels of Afghanistan to do something like this. I think that there's a more honorable way to do this than to abandon the SDF towards the quasi-legitimate government of Syria, simply because we want this whole problem to go away. There's much more to it. It's nuanced. I get it. I'm oversimplifying the issue, but I'm also deliberately packaging it in a way that's a little more digestible, and I'm emoting slightly in it. But that is, after all, what you are paying me to do. So that's it for this edition of the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition. Before we close out for the evening, I do want to turn it over to my friend and producer, Jason Maris, for any follow-up questions on anything that I might have asked. Jason, over to you, my friend.
Hola. Yeah, I have some questions for you. I kind of like, let's look at the domestic thing. What do you think about the active duty army possibly being deployed to Minnesota or some other?
Yeah. I don't know how that works with Posse Comitatus. I know he's used active duty forces Marines recently in California, Los Angeles, to protect federal infrastructure, and he may be using that same construct again. It hasn't been met with any legal challenges with success, so he could definitely do it. Are you asking me what my personal opinion is? I don't think it's necessary. In all of the cases that have taken place where the National Guard has been deployed, with one possible exception, and that would be DC, I don't think it was needed. And I want to be very clear when I say this. I'm not saying that he couldn't do it. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying it wasn't needed. I think that domestic law enforcement, whether it's local, state, or federal police, U.S. Marshals, FBI, I mean, there's plenty of individuals to handle just about anything, unless it's something on the scale of the Los Angeles riots. Calling in the National Guard in many cases it's just not needed. Yeah, but if he wants to do it, make no mistake, I'm not going to be one of these people that goes, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. I think it's overkill is the best way that I could possibly frame it. It's overkill. That's all. And I'm not making it a political thing. I'm just, preserve your forces. You don't need it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is definitely escalatory. I don't think that it actually acts as a complete deterrence in a lot of instances. When you start to apply force, you start to get a lot of oppositional. Yeah. The oppositional reflex kicks in, and anyway. So yeah, I guess the other moving on. I guess the other question I have pertaining to what you had said about China and what's going on in international waters. What is your opinion of, and I know we've discussed this a little bit, but since it came up, I'd like a refresher, but what is your opinion of their Navy, China's Navy, and how does it stack up to ours or vice versa?
Well, they have us in numbers. There's no doubt about that. There's a great debate as to whether or not they have us in capability. I don't necessarily think numbers as a raw metric equals capability, at least insofar as the Navy is concerned. I mean, in a land war, first off, as everyone knows, never enter a land war in Asia. But in a land war, the numbers count. because it's just a matter of attrition. But in naval terms, the fact that they have more ships than us doesn't necessarily give them an advantage. I will say that they are closing the technology gap, one that the United States has enjoyed since World War II. That delta is slowly shrinking. However, numbers and technology do not equal capability. The training and the experience that the U.S. Navy has, you can't buy, you can't build, you can't create. There's no facsimile for training and experience. And that is the one thing that the Chinese Navy cannot obtain, no matter how many ships they build. So I think we have the edge, but it is getting harder and harder to wield that edge.
Yeah, I would imagine, like, operationally, I mean, you just start to look at even the thing, what happened in Venezuela. It's pretty apparent that we're an efficient machine when it comes to operational.
Oh, yeah. And we've talked about this before. The one Achilles heel that China and Russia have as both is their centralized command and control structure, is the very fact that the U.S. has an NCO corps, a non-commissioned officer corps. That's going to continue to give us the unlimited advantage as long as it exists. And I know China is trying to fix it. They're trying to recruit an NCO corps, but dude, it takes a long time. You're not going to make that in 20 years.
Yeah, we did discuss that, and I totally agree with that. I mean, Russia's prime example.
Yeah.
If you moving on to Greenland, then it is interesting the EU's response by sending the military there, and all of the rhetoric surrounding Greenland, the EU standing up for Greenland. How do you think that informed Trump's decision to remove the tariffs? Do you think it had anything to do with it? What do you think that played strategically?
I don't think it had anything to do with it. I don't think he cared. I think that the intention that Europe was trying to project was, we've got it. It's secure. You're not needed. There's no weakness here. But again, I don't think Trump gave two shits about it. I think what changed his mind was something mercurial. I don't think we're going to know ever what it was, but he had conversations that took him in a different direction. He's prone to impulsivity, and I think that he has decided that military option is off the table, but he still wants it. But I don't think the presence of those 14, 15, 25 European military representatives did anything to dissuade his decision. I don't.
Yeah, I definitely think he was just advised heavily that it would be not so smart. And I mean, even Marco Rubio came out and said it would be ridiculous to do.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
It is kind of a crazy thought to attack the EU in Greenland is basically what you would be doing because of the representation of force that they brought there. It's kind of crazy. And it's something about Greenland that's like tangential to all of this that I thought was kind of interesting is I saw Bernie Sanders tweeted something about, the healthcare in Greenland is accessible to, everybody. And, he was basically saying, let's focus up on grocery costs and everything here. And healthcare here.
Yeah.
But that was it's just kind of funny because the quality of life in Greenland, I mean, it's like got a massive suicide rate. Barrier to entry for healthcare is territorial, it's like having to get there. There's housing costs is
Yeah.
extremely expensive. Groceries are
Sure.
extremely expensive.
Everything's imported.
So I just feel
Yeah.
like the opportunistic ways.
That guy will look for any opportunity to champion healthcare, nationalize healthcare. I mean, any excuse at all, any excuse, and he's all over it. I honestly don't know how he's still breathing. By the way, the guy is so old. Why? Why do we have to have our elected officials like in their 80s and 90s? Why is this a thing?
Yeah, you could say that about practically the whole Senate. I mean, it's insane. I mean, look at Mitch McConnell; he can barely speak.
Yeah,
It's
I think
nuts.
JD Vance is like the youngest person in the room by 30 years.
Yeah, the whole term limits thing. It's like, what happened?
Another discussion for another time. Yeah.
They're going to be standing on body bags in there for long.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to know is your snarky comments about the Board of Peace.
It's so quintessentially Trump, right? Like on the one hand, I love it. And the other hand, I cannot roll my eyes hard enough. It is everything that I have come to love about the president. And at the same token, everything that I have come to despise. Like you constantly, and look, dude, for very good reason, you constantly denigrate the UN and truly like fuck those guys. That is a worthless, ineffectual organization. But you replaced it with your own version of the UN. And like you basically made a micro UN Security Council whose charter was to rebuild Gaza, and you're going to charge people $1 billion for admission, and you're going to use the U.S. Department of War as your stick to this carrot. It's bizarre. I love it. I cannot wait to see what happens.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating. And Putin's response about the 1 billion, and Trump, he said that Putin had accepted, but Putin pushed back and framed it as still under consideration or being studied.
Oh yeah,
not a done deal.
Yeah, like I don't think that the Russians have a lot of disposable income right now, so I'm not holding my breath. But I do think it's fascinating that you invited him in the first place. I mean, he invaded a small country under completely false pretenses and has been slaughtering his own people for 4 years over it. And you invited him to the Board of Peace, and you did it with a straight face?
It's pretty ridiculous. Well, and the other thing about the 1 billion that Putin proposed is like it's to the Board of Peace. It's using Russian sovereign assets that are frozen in the United States.
Yep. Yeah. It's not even money that he has access to. He's like, well, we'll just use the money that the U.S. is holding. This is it's like hugely entertaining, and it would be really good theater if it wasn't so godly serious.
Yeah, it's like the inherent problem being unfreezing would require negotiations with the U.S. authorities.
Yeah,
and and Moscow is deemed the freeze illegal. So,
yep. Yeah, by asking us to unfreeze it, you vicariously admit that it was frozen legally and for the reasons in which we said it was.
So weird.
think at the end of the day, I honestly, and in all sincerity, I really don't care what the mechanism is, as long as there is some type of rebuilding in Gaza, some type of, you got to put that place back together. If for no other reason than you have, a couple million people who need a place to live.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and he can use that to try to leverage for sanctions or asset negotiations. I mean, he definitely has a motivation that has nothing to do with peace.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But in this case, I'm willing to say the ends will justify the means, but I want to see the proof first.
Okay, so let's move on to, I guess, Iran. Who suffers the most if we strike Iran, and what do you think we should do?
Well, the Iranian people are going to be the ones that suffer the most, because it's their blood and treasure that's going to be used to strike back at the United States, and they're going to bear the heavy lift of reprisals. So if they seize the day and continue their protesting, they're going to die by the thousands. If they stop protesting and the regime simply, brands the United States and Israel as the inceptors of the protest and now the aggressors externally, well, then you're going to use, money that they need to fix the economy to pay for counterattacks, pay the proxies to carry out things in their name. And so, I mean, either way, it's the Iranian people that are going to suffer, but they may, they may be willing. They may be at the limit of their advance in living under this theocratic regime. I don't know. I mean, all outward appearances have said that they have had enough, but peace and freedom and liberty are beautiful ideals until you're met with the barrel of a gun. And then you really find out if you're willing to die for those ideals or not.
Yeah, it is interesting that it's ramping back up. I mean, there's some brave individuals out there considering the dynamic.
I will definitely raise a glass to them. I mean, coffee, of course, because they're a dry country, but I wish them well.
So why not do a snatch and grab like in Venezuela?
You couldn't do it. And we talked about that in the last broadcast about this. I mean, one, the Ayatollah, it's very difficult to pin down where he is. We don't have the same basing that we did when we worked up towards Maduro. We had assets in the Caribbean. We had ships off the coast. We had that country pretty much on lockdown with a blockade. You just don't have any of that in Iran. And Iran has some things that we didn't or wouldn't experience in Venezuela. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's doable. It's just not going to be as crisp and clean as it was in Venezuela. And we don't have the intel that says where the Ayatollah is. The other thing is that there's no guarantee that it's going to do anything. I mean, the regime doesn't simply collapse because you abscond with its Ayatollah. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, you're like referencing having leadership, oppositional leadership, basically.
Yeah,
the
regime
is tangible.
It's more of an ideal than it is a system of government. You have zealots and true believers who buoy up this theocracy. I mean, Maduro, he was the president. I mean, that's ostensibly a democratically elected position, and now the vice president is in charge of the country. You take away the Ayatollah, you can't you don't take away the regime. You just take away the spokesperson. So I don't think it's going to work as well.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a much more complicated situation in a lot of ways. Okay. And then I guess the only other thing is the weekend strikes that you had talked about.
Briefly.
Yeah, briefly. Do you think that it has anything to do with the financial markets or just the news cycles?
No, I think the financial markets are always impactful, but I think first and foremost, it's the targeting cycle. If the target was available at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, then that's when you hit. It doesn't necessarily have to be the weekend. And then remember, just because it's the weekend here in the United States doesn't mean that it's the weekend wherever the X marks the spot is. It could be, 12 hours in either direction. So I think the financial markets are definitely a factor, but I think that is probably third in the order of priority.
Yeah, that makes sense. He doesn't really seem to be too fearful about volatile markets. So,
no, nope. Although he is pretty pissed that was it Goldman Sachs that just canceled his bank account?
I didn't see that. That sounds about right. It's either Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley.
I think it was Goldman Sachs, but he's suing them for I want to say $2 billion for closing his accounts.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. I'm having a lot of fun with it. This is going to be an amazing 4 years. I'm so giddy. I can't wait. Can't wait to see what happens. Because everybody keeps vacillating, right? Everybody thinks he's either a genius who's playing three-dimensional chess or something, whatever the other side of the equivalent is. And I love seeing people vacillate between those two extremes.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I have to say, it definitely can capture your attention. And I think, obviously that's by design,
great.
but
it is.
He's definitely doing that well.
I have said many times, I'm still on the team. So I'm not a huge fan of the team captain at the moment, but I'm still on the team.
Yeah, it's like, is he, like you said, three-dimensional chess or just stumbling drunkily through?
I don't know. That's for the history. The history books will have to determine that one.
Anyway, that's all I got.
All right, man. Well, that's it for this edition of the Carry On podcast. I have loved doing these sit reps, and I hope that you have enjoyed them as well. If you do, by all means, show the love with some Patreon support. And I do want to let Logan, Rose, and Skylar know that I see you, I hear you, and I appreciate you. Look out for your special edition swag. Should be coming soon. And if you have any ideas for a topic, if you would like to comment, if you truly hate me and would like to put that in words, you can reach the show at contact@bradcolbert.us, and we will put that email link in the bottom of the description as well. Until next time, I look forward to refilling my glass and emptying it over another event-filled week. I will see you then. Stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and